Welcome back to the Operational Risk Management series. The first two lessons provided you with a description of the tools needed to assess the initial risk associated with the mission. During this lesson, the Naval Safety Center experts will describe the third step of the ORM process: make risk decisions. Remember that you have control of the pace of the lesson. You can pause, rewind, or rewatch as needed. Let's get started. Step 3, make risk decisions.
Once again, we break it down to 3 actions. We identify control options, we determine those control effects, and then we make risk decisions. You're going to love this step because everybody's happy now. We're going to put some controls in place, and we're going to identify those controls. When we list these 3 major areas of controls, we talk about engineering, administrative, and physical controls, or PPE. Understand these controls are in this order for a reason. PPE is our last line of defense. It's not our first, folks. Unfortunately, out in the fleet, that's the first thing we like to grab and use. Is because we can touch it and we can feel it. We know what it is. However, we look at it other way. We first look at our engineering controls. Our engineering controls are our safety interlocks, our ABS brakes on our car, etc. Those are engineering controls where we have time to get the right answer. We put them in place. Our administrative controls are our SOPs, our briefings, our instructions, etc., to where we've used those and we know what's expected of us to go out to do our mission. Our last, like we talked about, is our PPE. Eye protection, hearing protection, body armor, etc. Okay? When we look at those control options, they help us in understanding what do we do about the risk. Do we reject it? Do we avoid it? Do we delay the action until we get controls in place? Do we transfer the risk to where our unit's not going to accept this mission? We're going to transfer it to another command? We compensate for it, but putting more personnel in place possibly. And the other way we look at it is we spread the risk. A great example of spreading the risk is the battle group. When we look at a carrier battle group, a carrier in the middle, we've got all our DDGs off to the side for carrier protection of the aircraft. We send the aircraft out further, that's more protection. And then we put the E2s for extended radar, more protection. We're spreading that risk across for the protection of the carrier battle group so it can complete its mission. We're going to determine those control effects. How does that control we put in place affect severity and probability? Yes, it can affect both. A lot of people think it can only do severity, but it can possibly change the probability depending on what control you put in place. We also have to look at what's the cost of that control. Is it people? Is it equipment? Is it time? Is it money? We have to understand that. How does the interaction with other controls we've put in place? And does that control make the risk acceptable? As saying is, understand, we could put controls in place, but it might not change that RAC code, the initial RAC code we came with. A great example I always like to use is the invasion of Normandy. If you didn't think they used risk management back then, they did. They might not have it in this form per se, but they used risk management. We had to get a beachhead in Normandy. We wanted to end the war. We were losing too many personnel. It was costing too much money. We had to get it done. So, hey, there's a lot of risk involved in this. They put some controls in place as prepping the beaches, trying to do landings at different times, trying to hack codes, etc. to get in there. They knew we were still going to lose personnel. So it still was a probability of 1 of a likely and a loss of mission capability units and death. It was still a RAC code of 1, but the benefits outweighed the cost. Remember that principle, benefits outweighing the cost. That's why we did it. So when we look at these, for an example, back to our drive to work, talking about curves, what are some controls we can put in? Well, for your car, you got ABS, that engineering control we talked about. Another control you can put in place is for yourself. Hey, my personal, I want to slow down a little bit, maybe the road's wet. Take that curve not so fast, slow down. Follow that little yellow sign where it says 25 on the curve, not take that curve at 45 miles an hour. Okay, those will change that probability. If you remember, we had a probability and a severity of an overall RAC code of 2 initially. When I put those controls in place, I now believe, in my opinion, I move the probability down to a D of unlikely with little impact emission of a RAC code of 4 for severity to an overall RAC code of 5, to with negligible risks. On our risk assessment matrix, when we got that overall RAC code of 5 at the end, we do this for every single hazard that we identified. We go through our initial RACs, we put the controls in, we re-evaluate those RACs, and then we come up with an overall risk assessment code for that mission. It is whatever the highest number is remaining. As if it's a RAC code of 2, it's a RAC code of 2 for the overall mission. We do not add up and divide whatever amount of hazards we had and figure out what our RAC code is. That is a misconception in the fleet. That is not what we do. We remain whatever the remaining highest RAC code is after we put those controls in place is our overall risk assessment code. When we look at making those risk decisions, who makes that decision? Everybody goes, hey, it's a leadership decision. It's the CEO, it's the XO, it's the CMC, the triad. In the long run, yes, they are taking the responsibility. Remember that leaders making risk decisions at the right level. But everybody has to look at it too, is when we send our team out there to do their mission, is the skipper always there? No, we have to sign who's there. We have to make sure we place in spots the supervisions to make sure things are correctly implemented as we go forward in our next step. Okay? We have to think about what is the risk to force and risk to mission. And remember our options back there. Do we delay it? Do we transfer the risk? Okay, etc. Right? Remember though, it's a leadership decision when we do risk assessments. Risk assessments does not automatically eliminate risk. Our missions are inherently risky in the Navy, no matter what it is. Okay, and we have to understand that decisions have to be made at the right level. So in review, making those risk decisions, we identify controls, we determine control effects, and we make risk decisions.
You just listened to the third lesson of the ORM series. The lesson covered the actions taken to make informed risk decisions by identifying control options, determining control effects, and determining acceptable risk levels. Before moving on to the fourth lesson of the series, review OpNav Instruction 3500.39 Enclosure 1, Section 8C, and rewatch the lesson if needed.